Man, crazy times we're living in. Good gosh. Love from me to all of you. Whatever that means, I do want to say I really hope everybody is hanging in there. I actually have had a really good week, and I'll tell you why. I have had a long-standing issue with needing security, predictions, like things set up nice and neat. When I say predictions, I mean being able to look at the future and kind of gauge, here's what's next, here's what next week is going to look like, here's what's the following, here's the next few months, here's the next few years, here's kind of my life plan for the next 3 years, here's how we're going to do with money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously having that sort of security and everything all nice and neat in your mind about the future, it's an illusion anyway, because we all know that anything could interrupt all that, and it happened. It happened this year. And so this time has really squeezed me in really seeing the things that are just not good, thought patterns that are not good. And so I've been wanting for this to be something in the rear view for a long time, and I feel like finally I'll say that I'm over the hump with this through some therapy, through common sense and logic. And then I'm going to say I really feel that God has helped me get over this hump. And so I am just kind of excited. I mean, it just feels like common sense. Why am I going to worry about things that I have no control over? I can't do anything about it. Why am I going to worry? Why not just enjoy being a human, taking one day at a time and letting things come as they come? And at the same time, oh yeah, I am extremely privileged even now, even in America, going through all of this. I've got way more than what I need. So I can just see God being like, it is about time. Or maybe he like snatched me out of this struggle, just saying, I can't stand to watch this anymore. I'll take that stuff out of his mind as a worry, because he's just too dumb and weak to do it himself. Bless his little heart. But hey, I am very, very thankful. I feel like it's a big, big step for me. So I'll tell you another thing that happened to me recently is I was looking through a photo album. For those of you that aren't familiar with that, it's an actual big book where you can stick actual pictures that you can hold into these little sleeves and then look at the pictures in a book and not on a computer. This used to exist, and I still have some of these albums laying around. Well, when I was a school teacher, I took some pictures of me and my students, and every time I see some of these pictures, I typically will put some of it on Facebook because I'm connected to a lot of these students on Facebook. Well, I put one of these pictures on there because we're talking, it's like dated, 17 years ago. And I'm like, yeah, let's look at my students. Look how grown up you are. About 30 minutes later, I'm thinking to myself, do people think that I just posted a picture of Joey Svendsen with a bunch of African-American children to say, look at me, look at who I'm taking a picture with? I really started processing this. Like, people are cool, we get it. You like black people, you've hung out with them. And very likely, according to those smiles and those pictures, African-American children have liked you in the past. Oh my gosh. And once it gets this complicated where I have to second guess putting a picture on Facebook of me and my students, things are complicated. There's a problem out there. I mean, I seriously, what do you call it? Virtue signaling. Hey, look at me. I'm not a racist. I just decided not to give it a second thought. Until now. I guess I'm thinking about it right now. So, hey, speaking how bad this world is right now. Today we're talking about whether or not demons exist. I mean, I never knew this was something debated within Christian circles, actually, up until about 2 years ago. It's very intriguing. I mean, what if it was as simple as demons sent the virus, demons are causing the division, and demons are going to decide who the next president is unless we start getting ourselves in check as a country. Now, obviously, most people who believe in demons don't see demons functioning just like this, but I have seen some people blame a demon for messing up their Wi-Fi. No joke. She was serious. But the question is, what if there were no demons at all? What if humans haven't had any help screwing things the hell up all this time? What a crazy thought. But man, if that's the case, we've got a lot of stuff to look at and process and second guess in the Bible. So loved meeting Tony Jones for the first time, and then throwing Jack into the mix was a great decision on my part. Not to brag. Hope you guys enjoy. Hey, but before that, we have Mark McMillan, myself, and Ella Mauro. We're talking about that delicate tension of we don't want to objectify women anymore, and at the same time we want them to have freedom of expression, including their bodies, and man, that's a complicated one as well. You guys have a good week. Peace and love, and hold on to those things as tightly as you can.
It's sort of like with birth control. Birth control was supposed to liberate women, right? So they could make their own choices, and if I'm taking birth control, I can just live my own life and I don't have to worry about getting pregnant, and it is that's supposed to liberate me. But instead what happened was it gave men the right to be like, great, women should all be on birth control, and if they're not, it's not my problem. So if she gets pregnant, that's not my problem. I don't need to take care of that baby. She chose to not be on birth control. So it kind of backfired a little bit, which is what I think, I'm mostly talking about how women dress in entertainment. That, I think, in theory, should liberate women because they should be able to do whatever they want and wear whatever they want. But that's so backwards because they're just giving sexual predators raw meat. You know what I mean?
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot. It's and this is sort of something I think about often is how there's a lot of issues that we've wrapped up into like a single issue. There's a lot of both and going on. So for instance, I think J-Lo especially, maybe Shakira as well, these are some of the most talented people in the world at what they do, right? They're not untalented, and they obviously work really hard. I mean, you see, they're both late 40s, early 50s. I mean, it's just unbelievable, their commitment to what they do, okay? But, there's... this is going to sound like a little bit of a rabbit trail, but I promise it's not. So I've got friends who are realtors. We just sold our house a year ago. And everyone in realty knows this. If you stage a house or if someone is living in your house, you will sell a house a lot faster than an empty house, right? Because if you go see an empty house, it's a lot more difficult to visualize yourself in that house, right? And so if you're not living in the house, the realtor, if they're a good realtor, they're going to want you to stage your house, because you're going to walk in and be like, I could sit here and I could watch the TV, or this is what we could do in the kitchen or whatever. And very, very intelligent people spending lots and lots of money are just more likely to buy a house when it seems like someone is living there, even though they know in their mind, they're not getting the furniture. They're not getting into this. They're just getting the house, right? Because the power of suggestion is so much more powerful than I think we realize. Not that it forces us to do something, but it's a tipping point, right? And so, I'm not saying what I'm going to say because I think J-Lo and Shakira are not talented, but if they weren't fairly sexualized, I don't think they would be as famous as they are. I don't think they'd have the opportunities that they have. Because I think that on top of their talent, they needed other reasons for people to pay attention. And as an artist and someone who tries to like sell concert tickets and stuff like that, I realized that like a lot of times it's these little tipping points that makes you the person they want to come see live, or that makes you the music they want to listen to. You know, is it the way you present yourself is often the way that you're going to be received, you know? And so like when I see, like, I wasn't outraged. I wasn't really mad. I really didn't even think about it. In fact, I'm not even sure that I saw it.
I wasn't outraged. Yeah.
I don't think I saw it. But when it came up, I was like, I think that people are over arguing. I think people are like really just choosing sides because they like to argue. It's like, but if we're going to talk just like, you know, basics, like I don't think that the pole dancing, you know, when pole dancing was invented, was like, women were like, we really need to like stretch out a little bit. Let's get a pole. You know what I mean? Like that imagery goes back to one very specific place. It is just a place where men pay to see women take off their clothes. I mean, it's not a good place where that comes from, you know? And so like, I don't really care that they did the pole, but it's a little weird for me to say, you know, this is liberating. I was like, well, no, it points back to a very non-liberated origin. You know, it's like, it's not just a pole. Like, it's a pole that tells a story, and this is the story that the pole is telling. The pole is...
That pole tells a lot of stories.
It's got a lot to say, that pole.
Yeah. Yeah, so, like, so think of Playboy, for instance. I mean, I can't speak for a Playboy model, but I think that part of that is they acknowledge the fact that they have a really nice body. They want to, you know, they probably have an interest in modeling. They don't. I don't know if they just are just love to have pictures taken of them and that sort of thing. But it would, and this is why I'm not sure if objectification is a good word to use here. But that is the purpose of what they are doing. Like their job is to have people look at them in a Playboy magazine or online or whatever and be like, ooh, I like how that looks. So that seems to be kind of a, yes, this is what we are doing. We are objectifying ourselves because that's why people look at these pictures for the most part is for sexual arousal. So I guess what I'm saying is where is that line crossed? I think we could all say...
Yeah, because you're getting into like sexual slavery if you're going down that route.
Well, I mean, don't you think there's some Playboy models that have a healthy, good life, or you just put all that into a super?
No, I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find any woman in porn who hasn't been wounded.
Now, porn, would you say Playboy is porn?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Would you not?
I mean, I usually when I think of porn, I think of actual sexual acts and all that stuff. I would see but yeah, I mean, I would imagine you're probably right that porn is a umbrella deal. But I think that I think this is just speculative. I think you could probably be a Playboy model and have just a different perspective on that profession than what most Christians would have, and have a really good balanced life. And you're like, I like to take my clothes off and have people take pictures of me. Whereas once you cross the line and you're in porn movies where there's sexual acts being done, that's where I would say I would agree with you that there's probably some woundedness there. There's probably something unhealthy. But I guess when I think of a woman posing nude, I don't necessarily think, oh yeah, she was wounded.
Yeah, because it may not be porn in that situation where it's a photographer and a model, but once those photos go elsewhere, that's when it is porn. Do you know what I mean? Because that's what it's being used for. Yeah. And I don't know. I think as far as liberation goes, I think if women really wanted to be liberated, we would objectify men and not try and take control back by dressing and acting a certain way for ourselves. Because I really just think it furthers the problem. Yeah. It's very confusing, especially for young girls. It's very confusing.
Yeah. John, what's your favorite nudie magazine. That's a joke, Ellen.
No, Joey, I'm like,
that was not a good joke. Okay.
I have a burning hatred for porn because I was exposed to it really young.
Yeah,
and
I'm sorry. I'm the asshole.
No, you're not an asshole.
Every podcast needs an asshole. Everyone.
Okay. Well, and it's more like I now know what it does on the others, not the other side of it. Like I was participating, but it's like leaving a loaded gun in a house, you know? Yeah. It's those neighbor kids across the street. And it's like, if those were just models, with good intentions, then why was a 7-year-old girl affected her whole life by looking at it when I wasn't being like aroused by it? You know what I mean? So there's a lot more to it, which is why I'm just anti all porn.
Yeah.
Hate it. Get it out of here.
Man, I'm excited about this conversation here with it's Dr. Tony Jones, right? Isn't it Doctor?
It is Doctor.
All right. It's the Doctor, and we've got Jack Hoey on here. You guys know him very well. I want to tell, before we dive into this conversation, I want to tell folks just how this came to mind, that this conversation came together. I think I discovered maybe like a year and a half ago that there were people in the Christian faith that didn't believe in demons and Satan and all of that. And I was like, man, I did not even know that was on the table of debate, so to speak. And so I seriously started to Google to find someone who did not believe in this. And I don't know if it was my successful Googling or if Preston Sprinkle told me about you, but somehow I found Dr. Tony Jones. And then I basically just called my friend Jack and said, Jack, do you still believe in demons? He was like, yeah. I was like, cool. We got it. Let's do this.
So seriously, like, I mean, that's one of the things that comes up for me on Google is whether I believe demons or not. That seems like a pretty obscure thing to be connected to on Google.
So maybe it was Preston Sprinkle. Maybe it was.
I mean, no, it could be. I'm sure I blogged about it back in the day. I mean, the thing is, like, I blogged hardcore for 10 years, so I didn't fart without blogging about it. You know what I mean? So right. Like, there was no thought went unpublished for 10 years of my life. So I'm sure there's stuff out there about that. Yeah.
Are you finding podcasting to be more efficient now with sharing your thoughts at the, isn't it the Reverend Hunter podcast?
Yeah, the Reverend Hunter podcast I've got another podcast called Killer Serials, where I go with another guy. We go through, TV shows episode by episode and like talk about spiritual theological themes. No, not more efficient. No, writing's I find writing far more efficient than podcasting. I mean, all this technology, coordinating what time we're going to talk, making sure that you don't lose the file, that it sounds good. And then, I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm pro podcast, but I mean, if it's coming to like efficiency, it's more efficient to find a blog post, skim through it, get the gist of it than listening to an hour-long podcast or whatever. But
yeah, I was joking around just a second ago. I'm talking to the listeners right now. I was on ReverendHunter.com looking through these books by Tony Jones, and I'm like, either I need to have this guy on this podcast 15 times, which I don't think you'll be able to fit into your schedule, or I need to pick up some of these books, man. It's definitely a lot of stuff that I have been thinking through and having questions about. So it's great to have you on here. And so how I would like to start this is just give a snapshot of what I find I was jogging today and I was thinking, okay, what are the main scriptural stuff about demons and Satan? And so I'm going to give that little snapshot and then pose a couple of questions to you guys. And I'm sure that this is probably going to be one of the easier conversations I've ever had to have on here. So the ones that come to mind is obviously the temptations in the Garden of Gethsemane. It seems like Satan was tempting Jesus. The whole deal that Jesus had as far as you get yourself all clean and then more demons come in. The pigs receiving demons, like what the hell was that about anyway? That was kind of a mean thing for Jesus to do to all those little piglets. The demon possessions that he freed people from. And then we have the everlasting fire prepared for Satan and demons. And then getting out of this Jesus deal, Peter talked about prowling, a lion seeking some, for people to devour. Paul talked about our power isn't even against flesh and blood. And then I did do one Old Testament, Daniel 10, with Michael battling the prince of Persia. So what I would like to ask you guys is if demons and Satan do exist, what are some problems that we need to grapple with as far as implications on Scripture, implications on God's character? So for an example, I've thought before, if demons and Satan does exist, why didn't God just annihilate them when they turned their back on him? We've got enough problems here as humans, battling our own selves, one another. We sure as hell don't need another enemy to have to fight. So that's what I want to ask you guys is if they do exist, what are some problems with that? And I would imagine maybe some of this would hinge on God's character, but I have no idea. How about you, Jack?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I would say
and feel free to say that's a dumb question. Let me answer it another way. By
Joey,
all means.
I would never say that to you. I would text it to you. So give me a second. Let me just no. I guess what I would say is, I think that probably the most immediate implications for me that I can think of are the fact that it would mean that there is an entire dimension of creation, an entire part of creation where things are happening, where God is working, that in a lot of ways that is just totally beyond our comprehension. And I think that, one of the implications there is, it's funny. So I'm here at the church, and I was just in the worship center doing some, recording for some of the stuff we're making right now. And one of the Psalms, I was doing talks about people saying, where is your God? And the psalmist's answer is, he's in heaven doing whatever he wants. And kind of the idea of, God, the way God works is, kind of in many ways beyond our understanding and certainly beyond our senses in terms of our ability to perceive it. And the idea of, angels and demons, if they exist, then what I would say is there's that whole idea that there is this way that God works that is beyond our senses. It really just expands that tremendously, I think, in terms of, there's this whole realm of activity that we can't really perceive, or at least certainly, we can't really decide when to perceive it. That seems like kind of a one-way street in terms of the way that some passages portray that. But that's kind of what I'd say is it just seems like the implications are that there is a lot more happening than our ability to perceive.
Well, I mean, it's hard to answer that question without the three of us spending a little time. What I'm guessing is that my understanding of Scripture is so different from Jack's that it's almost impossible to have that conversation as a starting point being, well, if Satan exists, what are the problems? Because I think you named the biggest problem of all already, Joey, and that's that if God is omnipotent, why would God allow there to be other demiurgical beings that are somehow somewhat divine or supernatural or beyond the material, that have purely evil intentions, and yet God allows them free reign? Or if not free reign, God allows them a certain amount of agency. It makes no sense. it's a very different question than asking, why does God give human beings free agency? I think that's a non-related question, because human beings aren't purely evil in their intentions as demons are portrayed in Scripture to be. So it just would make no sense that an omnipotent deity would allow there to be a whole population of supernatural beings with evil intent, messing with humanity and messing with God's creation. So on that, I think, Joey, you already said it. That's the biggest problem. That's the biggest theological, philosophical problem with the idea of demons that have agency somehow in our realm of existence.
Yeah, and just for our listeners' sake, I don't know what I think. If I had to lean one way or the other, I would probably lean towards them existing. Another thing that doesn't make sense to me, though, is, and this is my imagination a little bit, but I tend to think when we are in the presence of God in his fullness, even someone who rejected him throughout his or her life on earth, just being in the presence would melt someone's heart, and every knee will bow and every tongue will confess, of course, because you can't help but to confess Jesus is Lord. You can't help but to get on your knees in a very good and a very positive way. So I have never been able to make sense out of a third of the angels have had the opportunity to be in the presence of who I would think, if you're in the presence of this being, you would never not want to be in the presence. But not only did they not want to be in his presence, but they wanted to take over and to be in charge. That just, oh my gosh, it just doesn't make sense at all. All right, so I'm going to change gears a little bit here and go out, what I always do, go out of my order of plan here. I do agree with you, Tony, that you guys approach the Bible differently, but demons and Satan seem to be such a such an integral part of New Testament Scripture. What in your mind is going on here? Like, does Jesus think that there's actual demons? Are the gospel writers not writing this stuff down accurately? What would be your take on why do we read so much about demons and Satan and Jesus being tempted and all of that?
Well, quite simply because the Bible was written in a world that had a very different cosmology than what we have today. So let's just take your example of the demoniac who's chained up in the necropolis outside of the city walls, okay?
Yeah.
If you or I, if any of the three of us, or probably any listener, were to be walking down a city street and go by a bus stop, and there's somebody talking to themselves, screaming out obscenities, foaming at the mouth, hitting themselves, most likely because of our cosmology today, a science-forward type of framework of understanding, we would think, now there's somebody with a mental illness, there's somebody who needs medical attention, psychological, psychiatric help. We probably wouldn't say, although I'm sure there are some people who would say this, the majority of us in Western society would not say, let's cast the demons out of this guy into a herd of cattle in the closest farm field. We just understand the world differently today than did Jesus or did the people who wrote the Bible. I mean, it's hard. It might be hard for us to swallow, but the fact is, Jesus surely thought the world was flat. Jesus surely thought that the sun revolved around the earth. And we know that the earth revolves around the sun. So does that mean that Jesus was wrong to think that the sun revolved around the earth, that the sun literally rose in the morning and set in the evening? Like, he was constrained by his time, as were those who came after him and wrote the Gospels, as was Paul. So the way that they understood the world was, yes, demons and Satan were a big part of the way that they understood the world. It's interesting you mentioned Daniel. It's really the only place you can find that kind of those kind of demonic forces represented in the Old Testament. You can't really use Job for this. I don't think that's kind of a digression that we could get into. But the ancient Hebrews did not have a demonology. Demonology developed in what we Christians call the intertestamental time during when the Roman Empire became like the third different oppressive state that ruled over Palestine. A lot of apocalyptic literature was written during those times. We see a lot of it in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And a part of that apocalyptic mindset was that these evil spiritual forces were out to get us. So by the time Jesus arrives on the scene, those 420 years between the end of the Old Testament and the announcement of the birth of John the Baptist, the Jewish mindset had dramatically changed toward the apocalyptic. And so they were understanding the world in these supernatural spiritual terms. And so I don't count that against them. But we understand the world in very different terms now that are much more based on materialism and science than they are based on supernatural forces. Let's just take this pandemic we're living in. I mean, the way this pandemic would have been understood by the general populace and by the cultural elites in the Middle Ages versus how it's understood today, it's dramatically different. You just only have to read about, plagues in the late Roman Empire, plagues in the Middle Ages to see that they thought these were, God's judgment upon people. No one, very few. I shouldn't say no one, because I think there are a couple, like John Piper recently said, that COVID-19 is actually God's way of reminding us we're sinful. But if John Piper says it, it's got to be wrong. So there's got to be something else, some other explanation.
All right, so I do want to ask Jack here something in a second, but I just can't get this one stuck out of my head, and I'm not sure how literal you take the pig story. I was talking to Brian McLaren recently, and I'm not sure how literal. I can understand that fuzziness, but if Jesus casted mental illness out of people, did he send the mental illnesses into the pigs?
Yeah, I don't think that's not. It's
just a funny.
It's
thought.
A funny,
it's
interesting question that's not really answerable because they understood what was happening in their own cognitive frameworks. You know what I'm saying? And they couldn't have understood a mental illness. They couldn't have understood an SSRI antidepressant. They couldn't have understood that a virus is spread by somebody coughing and there are micro particles that travel 6 feet and go into the, nose, ears, and eyes of another human being. And let me just say this last thing on this. I say all this humbly in that I truly believe that 1,000 years from now or 2,000 years from now, should our species exist that long, which I'm not all that confident that we will, but let's say we do, they're going to look back 2,000 years from now and dig up this podcast and be like, those silly, immature, primitive human beings who lived in 2020 thought that viruses were spread by, germs or whatever. Now we know viruses are whatever. This is why people get sick. They'll have a totally different rationale that they'll look down on science the way we look down on demonology.
Well, just for the record, people often listen to me and have those same sort of thoughts, but it's more like, wait, he thinks this stuff in 2000.
Well, I just want to say, for the benefit of those listening 2,000 years from now, whatever you guys think, I also think. So just know that I am a right-thinking person.
I want to say to
the standards.
I want to say to the people
AD.
in 4020, what the hell are you listening to this podcast for? Do you not have better things to do?
People now think that.
Hey, as someone who has really struggled immensely with mental illness, I feel like I get a pass to kind of make some jokes. Like, I would love to see a big herd of pigs just chilling, having fun, and all of a sudden just struck down with depression. Like, what did that look like? Oink, oink, oink. Oh. All right, Jack, I want to ask you, how do you feel about Jesus being constrained knowledge-wise as far as how science works and all of that? Like, when you heard that, do you feel you can jive with that, or do you disagree?
Well, I think, in some sense, it's
because even Jesus thought that the second return was going to be sooner. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think that, in some ways, I think that, in some ways, it might be more helpful for this discussion to, if it feels like a dodge, tell me. But in some ways, it may be more helpful to take Jesus out of the discussion, just because he's kind of like a cheat code.
Yeah, who
in
needs
the sense that's like, Jesus wasn't. It's like, yeah. It's hard to know in terms of so believing that Jesus, is divine. But also believing that he was fully human. So to what extent, what does that mean to be fully human? But what I would say is, believing that Jesus is fully God and fully man, I have no idea, or I have no problem with the idea that he was constrained by his time, just like everyone else was. I have no problem with that. And what I would say is, in the same way as, Tony, you kind of alluded to just a moment ago, in the same way, we're constrained in all sorts of ways that we don't understand. Because you can't really understand your own constraints from where you're sitting, and I think though that it's interesting. I think one of the constraints that I do think we have that is sort of identifiable is, I think that our great knowledge in the material world, in science, I think one of the constraints we have is that we have sort of lost the ability to perceive the spiritual and the supernatural. I think that it's kind of like a muscle, right? When you stop using a muscle, it starts to atrophy. And I just think it's interesting that I think one of the things you've seen in just the world over the last couple centuries is this atrophy of this ability to perceive the spiritual world. So is that better? Is that worse? I mean, I don't know. I'm certainly not going to trade indoor plumbing necessarily for the ability to perceive the supernatural better. I think that, it kind of and I think it's one of the things that one of the mistakes we make about talking about the past is the better, worse, right? It's like, we're much better off because of these things. In a lot of ways, we are far better off than anyone who has ever lived. But I think that one of the things we forget sometimes is, hey, look, that does come with trade-offs. And it's, are the trade-offs worth it? Yeah, I would say that they are. I would, again, I think that vaccines and iPhones are, things certainly worth celebrating. But at the same time, I think that we also have constraints, and it's easy to forget that. It's easy to forget that because we understand so many things, that we're likewise constrained. And I think that one of the constraints we have is that it's hard for us to perceive, it's hard for us to understand a world that might have a supernatural component to it. And so, I've got no problem acknowledging that Jesus, the disciples, people living then were constrained, just as I think we are today in some ways that are hard for us to kind of grapple with.
Yeah. Well, so as far as kind of leaving Jesus out of the discussion, I see where you're coming from, especially we don't need to get into the what fully man, fully God means, but that's what my mind keeps going towards. So I'll give you this example. In the Garden of Gethsemane, when he was tempted 3 times, either that did not happen at all, or Jesus is really messed up mentally to think that he's actually talking to a spirit that wasn't even there. Like Jesus really did need some SSRIs. So, Tony, what would you do with that story?
Okay,
I
think you misspoke and said it was in the Garden of Gethsemane. I think you're talking about Jesus in the wilderness being tempted at the beginning of his ministry, right?
Yep.
Well, I mean, there's a couple things. First of all,
actually, I'm getting two things confused. You're
conflating two different stories. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So both of them, honestly, because I feel like, maybe Satan wasn't torturing him mentally when he was bleeding sweat, through his sweat. So yeah. So let's.
Okay. So
sure,
Jesus.
Yep.
So Jesus in the wilderness. Well, wait. I thought we were leaving Jesus out of it. But if we're not,
no, we can't. We can't.
If he's the only one in there, you can't. Let's.
Okay. This is kind of the point of that story, is that there were no witnesses to that story. Jesus did not write the Gospels. The Gospels are eyewitness accounts of what Jesus did. That is one of these rare stories where the Gospel writers, a couple of the Gospel writers, tell a story that no other human being was witnessed live. So either this story got passed down, Jesus told them this story, and then they wrote it down. They kind of, people will get mad if I say they made it up after the fact. I'm just saying it's one of those interesting, difficult stories that nobody witnessed. So Jesus must have, I guess we're going to assume Jesus told his disciples what happened, and then years later, when the gospel writers began to write these things down, they wrote down the oral tradition that had started with Jesus. Again, I'm not going to doubt Jesus' perception of that experience. And neither am I going to doubt some of my favorite writings in Christian history are from the Desert Fathers and Mothers, from about the 5th century to about the 15th century. The Eastern church version of monasticism, where these people lived in caves. A lot of them were tortured spiritually and mentally by demons. I mean, they write way more than we see in the New Testament. Yeah. So I think I don't want to ever discount somebody else's experience. My own experience is different than that, and I hope we can get into that, why I've come to where I have. But So, Jack, it seems like you've read some of those Desert Fathers and Mothers too. So that's like such a valuable, important part of the Christian tradition. It's not my experience, but I'm humble enough to say that, like I say about people in the future, will discount my understanding and explanation of the world. I'm humble enough to say that they had experiences that I don't have. And so I want to value those experiences, including Jesus' experience of being tempted in the wilderness at the end of his fast. And I think it's very common, even today, in human experience. I know I've spent some time on a Native American reservation in South Dakota, and the young men in that tribe go on vision quests, and they go out into the wilderness, and they also fast for long periods of time. So they start to actually see visions as well toward the end of those periods. So there's just one more thing I just want to say for listeners, that I agree exactly with what Jack is saying about we struggle with our ability to understand the supernatural. One of the most, if people are into philosophy, one of the most important philosophical texts to come out in the 21st century is a book called A Secular Age by a philosopher named Charles Taylor. And it came out in 2007. It's a beast. It's a doorstop of a book, but it, more than any philosophical text in the last 50 years, it is about our lack of ability to see the mystical, the mysterious, and the secularism in our culture that has given us indoor plumbing and ventilators has also stripped us of our ability to see the supernatural and have language for those things that that are non-material, that are or more than material. So I agree. I agree with Jack that it's not going to get me to say that there are demons, but I do agree that we struggle with the supernatural because of the rationalistic, scientific world in which we live.
I like that. So for a little bit of speculating, how would both of you feel about Jesus coming to the disciples and saying, man, I was fasting out in the wilderness, and near the end of my fast, I just felt like I really wanted to turn some stuff into some bread. And then I just thought, man doesn't live by bread alone. Gosh, it was so hard, but I'm so glad I remember that. And then I was thinking that I could throw myself off, this mountain and see if my Father would. How do y'all feel about maybe Jesus really struggling through some of that stuff? Man, I thought that I could just take over everything, and that would be awesome. I could just have it all, but I just kept referring back to Scripture. Do you think that's a possibility, that he had those temptations, told the disciples, and then it was recorded as Satan out there doing it?
Well, a couple things. One, I real quick, just to go back, if nothing else comes out of this podcast, but that some listeners go and read the Desert Fathers and Desert Mothers, this would be well worth it. Those are some extraordinary texts, extraordinary people. So everyone should read those. And some of their encounters with demons and some of their encounters with Satan, they make the stuff you find in the gospel look really neat and tidy. These were some incredible experiences. But, kind of getting back to what you said, Joey, I think that, I can absolutely imagine Jesus explaining it in this way. And I think, as Tony says, it's right in that it's probably most likely that this is something, this was either something Jesus recounted to his disciples or a teaching that he gave them. And that's how it found its way into the Gospels. And I would say that, if Jesus kind of walked them through it more in the way that you're saying it, well, gosh, what that sounds like is a lot like the way we talk about how we feel when we feel under spiritual assault. And I think that, so here's one of the things about Satan is, you can believe in Satan and not necessarily think that every mention of Satan in the Bible is meant to be a literal reference to that individual. And think of it this way, because, the way we talk about people is sometimes we refer to someone in authority to refer to everything that person is capable of. So, people will blame, and not just this president, people will blame the president or the government, and they'll kind of use figureheads as sort of like shorthand for that kind of oppression. So when people say, man, the devil was after me today, they don't literally mean, I believe that the devil took time out of his day to come after me personally. They just mean that, boy, I felt under assault from, evil spiritual forces today. And Satan can kind of be a shorthand for all of the evil spiritual forces that he represents. And so, I think that, is it possible that in recounting the story to his disciples, Jesus is using Satan as a shorthand for spiritual oppression? I think it's entirely possible. And if that is sort of what's happening here, rather than Satan appeared to me personally and these things literally happened, it was I was feeling oppression. I was feeling, hunger. And I was feeling so tempted and so oppressed to turn these stones into bread. And I knew my Father could do it for me. And using Satan as a shorthand for that oppression, one, I don't think I'd have a problem with that. And two, again, it sounds nothing like so much as the way we talk about how we experience spiritual oppression, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I want to say real quick that for some reason during this episode, I've kind of felt a little bit like Chris Farley on the Chris Farley show. Like when he said that he changed the stuff and do you think that's what he meant, guys? that was cool. What do y'all think? All right, so Jack, let me ask you this. What after hearing just a snapshot of where Tony is at with all of this, why do you feel like you cannot let go, or I don't even know if I'm saying this the right way, cannot or will not let go of a belief in demons? Like, what keeps you kind of grounded in, there's a spiritual enemy, there's principalities, there's things we can't see? Like, why do you still believe?
Well, I think that so one of the things that Tony kind of mentioned earlier is that one of the things you see throughout the Bible is, when God appears to Moses on Sinai, it's not, here is the Jewish faith fully formed. It's you see the Jewish people's understanding of God and the Jewish people's understanding of kind of the spiritual forces at work. You see that change and you see that evolve throughout the Old Testament. And not just spiritual forces, but you see their understanding of the afterlife, of the promises made to them. You see that change, throughout the centuries. You see that in the Bible, and, we see that through historical sources as well. And so, one thing I would say is, for me, part of it is this belief, or I don't want to say assumption, but this kind of understanding of the world, that there are benevolent and malevolent spiritual forces at work that can impact our lives. I mean, that is a universal human belief that is kind of irrespective of time and place, right? I mean, that is kind of common to all human civilization. You go back far enough. This understanding that, hey, there are supernatural forces that can impact my life for bad and for good. And you see kind of the understanding of those forces develop over time and become more sophisticated and more systematized. And so for me, part of it is that humanity has always kind of had this shared understanding that there's a world beyond the one that we can sense, right? There's a world beyond the material world, and that there are forces in that realm that can impact my life. And so part of it is just, there's always been this human understanding of that. And second, what I would say is, when I read the New Testament, what I don't see is a repudiation of that. What I kind of see is an acknowledgement of, yeah, that's true. And it's not so much and this is how all of that works, but it's yeah, that's true. Like there is a kingdom of darkness that is opposed to God's kingdom, and that's the one we're struggling against. And so what I would say is what I don't feel that I need to hold to is this highly systematized demonology, right? Where they've all got names and they all, have responsibilities, and that's not really kind of what I feel like I affirm. What I would affirm is that there are evil spiritual forces that we don't fully understand, but that are kind of part of this kingdom that is diametrically opposed to God's kingdom. And that's kind of what I see affirmed in the New Testament. And it may be that, what the reality there is that that kingdom of darkness, that kingdom of evil is really primarily or maybe exclusively made up of our sinfulness and the impacts of it, right? Like discovering that demons as individual spiritual beings aren't real, like that's not going to crater my faith at all. But what I see in the New Testament is I don't see that repudiated, and I definitely see affirmed this idea that there is a kingdom of darkness and there are forces that are opposed to God's kingdom and the work that he's trying to do. And so again, I don't feel the need to hold to this very detailed, very systematized form of that, but neither do I feel like I can jettison it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And you are also assuming like intellectual beings, not just impersonal forces, but intellectual beings.
I think that for me is the hard one. Well, so if they're impersonal beings, like what does that even mean? I guess. And I mean, Joe, it's like for me, this is a thing where like Adam and Eve, like the existence of hell and all of these things that I kind of hold very, very loosely and very open-handed in terms of I'm not in a rush. Like there's a clear tension here for me in terms of, hey, I don't fully understand this, and based on my current understanding, I kind of feel like I need to affirm this. But holding it very open-handedly and not really being in a rush to resolve that tension. So there's definitely a tension there where, again, I think you see in the New Testament, you do see instances where they're portrayed as intelligent individual beings. But at the same time, you also sort of kind of see them portrayed as just forces of chaos. And I don't know, how to reconcile the two necessarily, but it's, again, it's like kind of that tension that I'm happy to like just sit in that tension and sit in the discomfort. Because I definitely think that there's something that, again, we don't fully understand that. And it's something where I don't feel like I can get rid of it. But it's also not something where I feel like I have good enough handle on to say, this is absolutely what I believe about this, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like a cop-out. I hope it's not a cop-out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cop-out-ish. How about that? Tony, why don't you respond? And then also you were alluding to wanting to be able to go a little deeper with how you came to where you're at right now.
Well, my response is that I don't think there's that much. I don't think demonology is that deeply woven into the text of the New Testament. Yes, it's there. I wouldn't say if you came away from if you're a literary critic and you read the whole New Testament, you'd be like, one of the top 3 themes of the New Testament is demons are out to get you, and God is battling them on your behalf. I think it's like way down the list. You know what I'm saying? A little bit like speaking in tongues. And some people make speaking in tongues like the single most important thing of New Testament Christianity, when any honest reading of the New Testament shows it's clearly not one of the most important things in New Testament Christianity. I think the same with demons. So it's a little bit of a footnote, and I would say it's part of the literary world of the New Testament in the same way that planting seeds by hand is a part of the literary world of the New Testament. So, Jesus uses parables of like a type of planting that very few human beings on the planet do anymore, which is like you have a sack of seeds slung over your shoulder and you walk through a field sowing your seeds. And that parable made perfect sense, of course, to the people of his time. Now in Sunday school, you have to kind of explain that to kids. You know what I'm saying? It's not like we're kids in your youth group are doing a lot of sowing of seeds by hand. And demons in the same way are part of the literary world of the New Testament. I'm writing a historical novel right now set in a very different time period than our own. And it's super hard to write in such like, I need to write in a way that doesn't use any literary device or euphemism that's 21st century. You know what I'm saying? I can't rely on some cliche that wasn't even invented in the 4th century when the novel is set. So I just think demons are a part of that literary world. They're not so much. It made a lot of sense for them, and I just agree. I mean, another thing that Jack said that I agree with, I live in the tension. Here's how I'm kind of seeing this. It's like the two of us are on a football field. You're on one side of the 50-yard line. I'm on the other side of the 50-yard line. You feel tension that you might be on the wrong side of the field. I feel tension that I might be on the wrong side of the field. But I look around and I don't really need to attribute the evil in the world to supernatural forces. I think human beings are shitty enough that we're the authors of so much terrible stuff that I think it's becomes a cop-out for Christians who say, well, the devil made me do it, this kind of thing. And maybe none of the three of us would do that, but we all know people who do that. They find demons under every rock, and they abdicate their own personal responsibility in systemic evil in the world because there's this demon loophole. It tends to allow human beings to take less responsibility for their own agency. If there are beings that are more powerful than us in the divine hierarchy of beings, well, how much can we even do? We're just kind of pawns on a chessboard. And I don't know if you guys are old enough to, have read the old my time was the Frank Peretti novels. I was not the Left Behind novels. I was the Frank Peretti, This Present Darkness. And
that's where I started too.
Okay, remember those? And in those novels, human beings basically are pawns on a chessboard being pushed around by demons and angels. Once in a while, human prayer, if enough human beings pray, they get just enough, their lightsabers become just strong enough to fight off a demon, but mostly no. And I just think that's led to all sorts of terrible theology, terrible human behavior in the church and stuff like that.
That's good stuff. I really like. I think that the balanced perspective that you guys have and the tension that you have learned to live in is super important for all of us to figure out. I definitely respect that. So that's basically what you would say, that right now, Tony, you're in a place of this. If you're under very high suspicion that what you believe about demons is true, but you don't necessarily need to have a theology that you're standing on.
I mean, what I'd say is I'm skeptical that there are demons. I see no evidence of it, and yet enough people I respect currently, and particularly in Christian history, have believed that I can't completely discount it. So I have to at least have a sliver of doubt in my mind that maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right.
Yeah, no, I like that. Jack, how would kind of have a parallel comment to what he just said? Where would you kind of hang your hat on?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I think that the 50-yard line analogy is a really good one, in that I think that, Tony and I, in a sense, the way that we view this are almost mirror images in terms of, I would say that I have reasonable confidence that, demons are real. But boy, there are enough people that I respect that think that's crazy to where I need to keep that in mind as well. And there's definitely some doubt in my mind that I could be wrong. And so in a sense, it's so we're on either end of the 50-yard line, but I feel like we're both kind of at the 50-yard line. And, I think part of the thing for me is the way I try to think about some of this stuff is, is this something that would really impact my framework for viewing the world if I'm wrong? And this just isn't one of them. It's funny. Years ago, I was asked to do a systematic theology class here at the church. And so we got to the week that was angels and demons. And everyone in the class told me they were really looking forward to it. And I said, well, kind of bad news. We don't really know much about either. and they were like, what are you talking about? Because I'm sure they had all the books and the Frank Peretti. And man, I must have read This Present Darkness and Piercing the Darkness a dozen times when I was in middle school and high school. And but the reality is, even if I feel confident that angels and demons are real, and you have to acknowledge, even if you're totally convinced, you have to acknowledge that frankly the Bible doesn't provide a whole lot of information about them. And so what I would say is the real serious weakness to my position is you kind of have to say, yes, I believe this, but honestly, I can't give you a whole lot of details about how any of that works. But I think that's part of it is, and if that was a really crucial part of my worldview, that would really be something that I wrestled with really strongly. But because it's something where, boy, this isn't a crucial part of my worldview, and I'm okay with that ambiguity of there's a supernatural world that we're just not given a whole lot of details about. And I guess I kind of have to be okay with that in some sense and really decide, okay, so what are the things that I really feel like I need to determine what I believe, because this is really crucial to my worldview. And what are the things that I can really hold open-handed? And I try to kind of put as many things in that open-handed category as I can, because it's if everything is in the close-handed category, man, you're just a miserable person, and that's a miserable way to go through life. And every time there's a challenge, you just get insecure and afraid. And I just don't want to go through life that way.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, last question. One of you brought up the whole, or I think maybe you both touched on it, just the unhealthy attention that is brought to demons about every little thing. I mean, I'll never forget. I was with someone, and she was trying to play a CD on a CD player, and it was messing up, and she tried to cast a demon out of the doggone thing. And I looked at her, I thought she was joking, and she was not joking, man. That demon was messing up that CD player. Is there anything healthy, regardless of whether demons really exist? Is there anything that you guys can think would be healthy to have that belief?
I guess the one thing I'd say, and it goes back to me referencing this book called A Secular Age, is that at least it would make you believe in something beyond the material, something beyond what we can understand using our rationality and using scientific measurements. That there are still mysterious things in the universe. I mean, I personally look at what we know about the cosmos, what we know about the planet Earth relative to the rest of the universe that we're in, plus the multiple universes beyond our universe. And it just it starts peeling away layers of an onion for me of like, well, where are these demons? Like, do they live? There's enough to relativize my existence already in just looking at what we know from science. I don't really need some supernatural beings to remind me that I'm not the center of the universe. I just have to remember what we've learned in the last, couple hundred years about where we are in the cosmos to be reminded of that. But I guess I would that for those people who do believe in it, at least they appreciate that there are things that we can't explain.
Yeah. Dr. Tony Jones, it was great having you for sure, Jack, as always. And I do want to tell people about ReverendHunter.com. Man, you do a lot of stuff. Like, I even take trips to Italy and welcome people with you, outdoor stuff. My gosh, you are a busy guy, but that podcast is relatively new, correct?
Yeah, we just launched that a couple months ago, so I'd love it if people gave it if people are interested in finding God and spirituality and transcendence in the outdoors, I hope they'll give the podcast a try, yeah.
Yeah, and you're holding a gun. Does that mean you shoot poor defenseless animals?
Yeah, they're not defenseless. They're not. That's the whole the spirit. The spirit of fair chase is that whenever you hunt, the animal has the opportunity to escape.
I definitely enjoy buying that meat from the grocery store for sure. So.
That meat that cannot escape. That meat that's already in the saran wrap, that meat cannot escape. The meat that I'm after can escape.
Now I feel bad. If you're a vegetarian for moral purposes, I definitely esteem you, and I see where you're coming from. I see where you're coming from. How about
vegetarians from the year 4000?
Yeah, exactly. There will be no wild animals left, probably, so they'll all be vegetarians.